We are continuing You Can Change the World, The Christopher Approach by James Keller. And we should be finishing Chapter 17, Public Speaking, Presentation with a Purpose. Part of knowing yourself is being aware of your bodily movements. An old-fashioned form of public speaking prescribes certain physical gestures to accompany certain expressions. Today, this form of speaking is considered out of date, which is probably why it's so effective, right? Good gestures are natural gestures. The worst thing you can do is give the audience the impression that you are more concerned with what you do with your hands or feet than with what you were trying to say. After a while, your listeners will suspect that the important thing in your public appearance is not your thoughts, but your physical extremities. On the other hand, if you forget about your gestures, so will your audience. If you concentrate on what you have to say and talks with a Christopher purpose are needed urgently, your listeners will reflect your conviction. Never assume that an audience will be angry with you if you give them a moment or two of silence, to allow your words to impress themselves on their consciousness. More often than not, they will be grateful for the opportunity to digest your ideas. It is a mistake for anyone to begin a talk with an apology. If you are unaccustomed to public speaking, there is no need to advertise the fact. Most audiences will accept you at a face value. And if your words reflect the sincerity of your conviction as a Christ-bearer, then your listeners will accept your message in the same spirit. Your task as a speaker is to impress your motivation on those who hear you. As a Christopher, this should be especially easy, since the truth of which you speak has stood the test of time and is rooted in eternity. Well, there's, of course, the difference between what's actually of Christ, or one of the Christs, or and what is said, right? But didn't the Bible state that Jesus came to, address the lost sheep of Israel? And some of his the teachings in the Bible attributed, and some of the other Gospels seem to be not for the modern time and not for, areas with snow and that sort of stuff. Know your audience. While all audiences have much in common, they still have their own individual characteristics. To know your audience is to speak more effectively to them. In doing this, there are several factors to be considered. 1. What is the interest of your listeners? Not all people are equally interested in the same things. If you know the reason why they have gathered to hear you, you can proceed to use their interests to heighten their concern in your comments. Begin with those things that affect your audience and begin on them. Build on them. It is a sure guide to success. 2. What is the background of your audience? In teaching, the instructor speaks in terms of the apperceptive background of his pupils. That is, the quantity and quality of the background, which makes it possible for them to absorb what is being taught in the lesson. Every good speech is comparable to a new lesson. Its point of departure should be the knowledge already in possession of the listeners. 3. What is the occasion? Speeches are not always made under the circumstances. A speech should be adjusted to the mood of the moment. It should be part of the occasion. 4. What is the size of the audience? You will not always find it effective to speak to 6 people as you would to 600. Smaller groups demand greater intimacy and informality. Larger groups require a more formal approach. If you know the size of your audience in advance, you will find it easier to prepare to speak to them. When you have mastered the first 3 rules of good public speaking, mastery of conduct, of self, and of audience, there are a few additional suggestions. It is well to bear in mind. Use illustrations. The human mind can follow concrete examples more easily than abstractions. On public speaking, it is advisable, as did Christ himself on numerous occasions, to present illustrations. Explain what you mean by giving an example. Use stories. Retell real incidents. Cite newspaper reports. You will find that you can interest the most apathetic audience with the presentation of even one strong illustration, vividly told. Look at your audience. This means you should talk to more than one person directly in the eye. To one person among your listeners. Talk to all of your audience, but do not be afraid to pause frequently and look some person directly in the eye. You will thus get some idea as to how your listeners are reacting to what you are saying. It also makes for the audience contact. Never become angry with your audience. This is a variation of the Christopher theme of being able to disagree without being disagreeable. No matter how provoked you may be, don't show it. Don't shout. Don't lose your temper. Your task as a speaker to persuade your listeners, to win them over to the God-given truths which form the foundation of your philosophy. If you allow part of your audience, by its behavior, to turn against the whole group, you have lost and your enemies have won. For Christopher, this point should be especially significant. Sometimes in the group which you're addressing, there will be those in whom the idea of a supreme being arouses violent hatred. Guiding every action should be the words of our Savior himself. Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that persecute and calumniate you. Now, of course, one of the things, not that you don't defend yourself when people say things, via your words. But yeah, philosophy is not just quotes. You're not doing philosophy if you're quoting people, even if you're jumbling a bunch of quotes, right? The spirit of Christ's love, then you can go far in reaching the world if you will have the patience and courage to persist in your work of carrying Christ to all men. And if we understand Savior in the Zoroastrian sense, not as an incarnate deity, but as an individual that has set the saving example and brought the saving message, then we can be broader in our sense of not only personal accountability and such that we've set forth here, but a complete approach to loose, truth, meaning, light, meaning all good and truth, right? And epheros, and bringing it, illuminating it, setting that example